Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedco.com, and this is video number 5 in the React 2021 course. And this video is going to be on making API calls and the useEffect hook. Now, at the end of the last video, in my custom library Merced React hooks, we noticed a little bug with the condition component. I did fix that, so the condition component is working a-okay. And then 2, I've also added some extra little features. Now you can actually pass it a function as well. You will see that in action a little bit later on today. But again, if you want to stay in touch, just head over to the Slack or Discord community here at devnursery.com. I'm always kind of hanging out there, so you can message me videos you want to see, or just ask me a question, or talk to some of the other people who hang out in these spaces and be part of the community. But with that, let's get back on the bandwagon. So what I want to do today is that we're going to make an API call. So I have this dummy data page that I use to just do like practice API calls. So we're going to be using this Pokemon data in order to just kind of make a call to get the data. And so I made this Pokemon component, and that's already being rendered in, well, it's going to be rendered in the app.js. So Pokemon, I'm gonna be the very best, the best there ever was. Okay. Anyways, music.alexmerced.com. Anyways. Now let's go look at the app. Let me actually restart the server. npm start. Okay, and then we should just see Pokemon in a second. Yep, there. So let's head over to our Pokemon component. And basically making an API call in React is just how you normally make an API call. That means if you want to use fetch, which is what I'm going to use, the built-in way of making API calls in JavaScript, you could use fetch. If you want to use a third-party library like Axios, you can use Axios. If you want to use one of the bajillion other possible HTTP request libraries there are, you can do that. Up to you. So what I'm going to do is first, let's just actually see how to make the API call. So best practice, or at least my recommendation, is make a function that makes the API call for you. So we're going to call get Pokemon, and it's, well, this should be a variable. So const get Pokemon equals a function, takes no arguments. And I'm going to make this an async function because I like using async and await. And if you really want to learn more about async await and the in-depth deep dive on the fetch function and Axios, go watch my videos on asynchronous JavaScript, where I cover promises in depth, along with making API calls with like jQuery's Ajax function, the fetch function, the Ajax function, the Axios function, and just kind of go a deep dive on how all that is working under the hood and async await and whatnot. Just type in like Alex Merced asynchronous JavaScript, and you'll find those videos. Okay, now basically we'll just fetch like you would normally use fetch to do. Okay, so I would first create a variable called response, then I'm going to say await fetch, and then I'm going to pass fetch the variable of where the data that I want to do an API call for is. So right there. So that'll make the API call, and the response of the API call is stored in response. The problem is the response is this object that I can't really use. It's like a weird like response. I think it's called like a response object. So the data is kind of nested in there as like raw bytes, and I need to turn that into a JavaScript object. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to turn that into data I can use and save it in this variable called data. So what I do is that the response object has a method, so I'm going to hit await response.json, and that's going to take those bytes and convert them into a JavaScript object, that buffer, if you will. Okay, cool. And then I can console log it, and we can see that I'm successfully calling the data. I'm successfully accessing this data in my app. So I'm going to open up the DevTools so we can take a look in the console log. Okay. Boop, 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 boop. Oh yeah, right. Let me refresh the page. Okay. Oh yeah, the function's not being called, so I have to call the function. So get Pokemon. Okay, so now we see the console log, and I'm getting all 151 Pokemon. That's great. The problem is I want to use them in my JSX, but that Pokemon only exists within this curly brackets, within this scope. So generally the way you want to do this is you're going to use state, because the idea is that if we store it in state, the minute I update the state, that triggers the component to re-render, so now my JSX can render with the new data. Okay, so I'm gonna go import the useState hook. Import, let's see if I can just do it this way. useState, yep, nice. Okay, useState. And now I run into a second problem now, because if I were to just update this function to save the data in state, this again, every time the component renders, this whole function runs again, which means it'll call the getPokemon function again, which will update the state again, which will cause the component to render again. And then this cycle would just repeat forever. I'd create an infinite loop. I don't want to do that. So this is why we have the useEffect hook. This is going to allow us to do something when the component loads without it continuously repeating itself. Because it doesn't happen every time the component loads. It'll happen only the first time and other desired times that we specify. Okay, so how does that work? Well, this useEffect hook takes a function as the first argument. So there's a function. And it takes an array as a second argument. So it takes a function and an array. Now this function will always at least run once when the component first loads, and then repeat itself anytime anything in this array changes. I'm not going to put anything in this array because I don't want it to ever run again, which I would say the vast majority of the time is what you want. Then why put the array? Well, if you don't include the array, it will just loop infinitely. So make sure you include that empty array. It may give you some warnings. You can most part ignore those. It's just kind of saying maybe you did want to put the thing in the array, but a lot of times you don't. So all I want to do is just move this call to getPokemon inside that useEffect function. So now when the page first loads, it'll make this call to getPokemon. See, it's getting the Pokemon data. Good. And now what I want to do is update this function, but first I actually have to create some state. So let's create some state to hold the Pokemon. So we'll call it Pokemon. And then we will say set Pokemon. And I want to say equals useState. And then I'm going to initiate an array. Say it's an empty array at first. Okay. And then I'm going to say that when we get the data, what I want to do is set the state. I want to set the Pokemon. And I want it to equal the data, but I don't want it to equal the data because the data is technically it's an object with an array inside of it. I really want it to equal this array. So I'm going to say I want to set Pokemon to data.Pokemon. And again, I know this because I console log the response, so I can see what the response is in the console and determine really what I want to say. It's not the data itself, but the Pokemon property in the data. So it's always important to, when you're making API calls, console log what you're calling first. Get to know your data. Take a moment, look at it in the console, figure out what it is. But yeah, so now if I look at my state, so I go to Pokemon, I can see that in my state I have the Pokemons. Okay. Cool. So this function, so again, this useEffect is calling this function, which calls our getPokemon function the minute the component loads. Awesome. And that's going to update our state. So now I just need to do the state. Now I could do this in a couple different ways. I could use a ternary operator, okay, which is, again, the typical way you'll see this done is a ternary operator with a map. We'll loop over the array with a map. We'll test whether we have the data, because again, you don't have the data before the API call completes. So on the very first time this component renders, technically all I have is an empty array or whatever I initiated the state at. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if Pokemon.length equals 0, okay, then I want it to say no Pokemon because there's no Pokemon. If that's not the case, then it has more than one. Let's say let's first just put something small. We'll just say H1 has Pokemon. Okay, so we're using this ternary operator. And let's see if that works and see has Pokemon. So if I refresh this, you'll see no Pokemon, then has Pokemon. Because the first time this renders, the length is 0. So on the first time, the no Pokemon H1 runs, and then on the second time, this runs. Okay, so that's essentially how you do it. That's how the ternary operator helps us. Okay, that's well and good. Cool. So now you can see like the ternary operator in action. So all you have to do is just think of like, what is it you're asking? So in this case, I'm testing it based on, whether the array is empty. But depending on what data you're pulling in, you would just ask like, how would I know that I've received the data, and create an expression that checks that. Okay. So now that I have established that the Pokemon are coming in, I don't want to just show the words has Pokemon. I would like to list all the Pokemon. So usually the way we'll do that is with a map. So really what I want to do is a Pokemon.map as the alternative condition. So again, when the Pokemon array has a length that's not 0, what I want to do is map over the list of Pokemon. So again, and then again, the way map works is I get the individual item each time. So we'll just say Poka would represent one Pokemon. Okay. Okay, and just to make it even clearer, I'll just say the current Pokemon. So that way you see like that variable represents the Pokemon we're looping over, because we're looping over the array. And then for each Pokemon, what I want to do is return. So let me just do this just to make it a little bit more readable. What I want to return is an H1 with the current Pokemon's name, .name. But of course, I want to make sure I put that ID prop, because like you'll see, like it's going to be warning me about an ID. So if I look at the data, so if I go back to my components deal here, I can see that each Pokemon has an ID property. So I can see like there, it has an ID property. So what I could do is just go over here and say key equals current Poka.id. And that's going to make that warning go away. See, now we're good. And see, I see all the Pokemon being listed. So you notice, like, I didn't have to write all that. The map is looping through the data. And the map only loops through the data if the array is not 0. So that way I don't cause an error. Now you may be saying, okay, this looks like, I get it. This is the way that's like probably typically done, but this is still like a little funky for me to read. Well, you could use a normal if statement. I could write this like so. I could just say if Pokemon.length equals 0, and then just write this as a standard if statement, where I say if it equals 0, return H1, no Pokemon. And then again, I should have kept that map. Let me do that. Let me just go back and get that map, so I don't have to write that whole thing again. So I'll cut the map, and then I'm going to cut this, and then change this to if Pokemon.length, the length of the array is 0, then we're going to return H1 no Pokemon. And if otherwise, we'll return the result of the map. So this might be a little bit easier to understand. I'm just saying, hey, if the Pokemon's empty, if the array is empty, I'm going to show this on the screen, and if it's not, I'm going to show that on the screen. Either way is fine. Okay, I could even use those hooks that I mentioned that I created in the previous, not those hooks, those components I created in the Merced React hooks library. So I could be like import condition and loop from React. Okay, and the way this would work is we would return condition. Okay, but again, condition needs an if prop, like what needs to be true. So we'll say if Pokemon.length equals 0. Okay. Actually, I want to do it if it doesn't equal 0. So I want to do this one a little bit differently, because I want to put what's true in between. If it does not equal 0, what is it complaining about? Condition is not defined. Didn't I import it? Oh, I spelled it wrong. Condition. There we go. So if Pokemon, and then again, if that's not true, then I want it to say like H1 h1 no Pokemon. Okay. Cool. And then what I want to do is then in the middle, because I'm using asynchronous data, I want to pass a function. So I don't necessarily want to just pass the JSX. What I want to do is pass a function that returns the JSX. So that way it doesn't evaluate the JSX until the function is run. So in that case, I would then just pass the h1 here. Well, then again, I'm going to use that loop component. So I would create a function that returns the loop component. So loop. Okay, this is essentially getting the same thing. So I'm saying if this is true, then run this function with this loop. And again, the function was it with this, which is the Pokemon. What I wanted to do is do that equals, and it would just be another function that is like, again, the current Pokemon. So I'll just write current just because too lazy to write all that over again. Return a div with an h1 that says the Pokemon name, so that'd be current.name, and then div, again, we'll give that a key equals current.id. Essentially, this is the same thing using those components. Let me just refresh. What is it like? It's saying element type is invalid. For classification. Saying it's returning not a string. See here. Let me think about that. Condition if Pokemon.length, if not, h1 no Pokemon. Let's just see if I do this. Well, let me cut that out. Control Z, cut that so I can bring it back. h1 has Pokemon. Okay. I'm still getting the same error, so I don't think it. Okay. Okay, that took a while. Okay, so I was inspecting to figure out what the issue was you saw a second ago there. It turned out the whole time is just I was importing it from the wrong library. I accidentally said I was trying to import it from React when I should have been importing it from my own library. I said React hooks. Yeah, so that was a fun detour. Okay, so let's go back. Let me just rebuild that example. So again, Pokemon. So if Pokemon dot length is not 0, okay, if not, then, you know, basically if it is 0, then what we want to do is again show the h1 that says no Pokemon. Okay, and see it says hello world, which means it's becoming true, so that confirms that there's an API call. But ideally what I want to do is show the Pokemon. So what I can do is I can pass a function like so, and this function will run, and see right now it's because the function is not returning anything, so it's saying something is wrong. But what I can do is then this function can then return the JSX I want, and again it receives, so in that case what I want to do is return the loop function, and the loop will with this, or is it, yeah, with this, which is the Pokemon, do that. Okay, which will be a function that takes a Pokemon. Actually, I should probably call it Pokemon. Call a Pokemon. And then, do I have too many curly brackets? I think I do. Yep. loop. Oh, just because I haven't closed the loop component yet. So if I do this, okay, so do that, and then I just need another one to close that curly bracket there. So there we go. That's what it wants. Return h1 a Pokemon dot name. And there we go. Okay, so again, you could use this condition loop. So again, this represents like the condition in which you would render, and then when it's true, it renders a loop. Any of these ways work. You could use the ternary operator, but the bottom line is that you write a function that makes the API call. You're going to store the result of the API call in state, and then not use the data directly from the API call, but use the data from state. But because that state will never have the data on the first render, you always have to kind of conditionally check, is the data there yet? Okay, so in this case, I'm checking, hey, is the array's length greater than 0? If it's not 0, then we're good to go and do this loop. But if it is 0, then do the if not situation and do that. Okay, but either way, one of these would work. So let me just save that so that way it looks a little bit better. But you can see it's like conditional loop. So basically on this condition, it'll loop over this data. Okay, but again, those are bonus if you decide that you would like to use my Merced React hooks library. That's an option you have. One other option you have from the library is a function called useFetch, which would simplify this whole fetching data property. And let me just go bring up the documentation on that, because it's been a while since I wrote that particular function. npmjs.com, Merced React hooks, and let's look up useFetch. At least I think it's called useFetch. Use form state, useFetch. Here we go. Okay, so in this case, if I wanted to use useFetch, okay, I wouldn't necessarily even need to create state per se. Okay, so what I would do is actually I can probably even get rid of the useEffect because it knows the pattern. Okay, so what it'll do is I would just say const Pokemon refetch Pokemon, meaning it'll redo the API call if I need the API call done again. So I'll just call that function whenever I need the API call to happen again, and I would use fetch and then pass it the Pokemon URL, which, let me do that. Okay. The only difference here is that it's going to take the raw data from the API and set it to, it's going to set that to what the variable is. So this variable is going to actually equal the object with the Pokemon inside of it. Okay, so I'm going to have to do a couple little things here to fix that up. Okay, so see right now it's saying cannot read length because the object is not an array. So in that case, what I would want to do is that instead I want to check whether the Pokemon dot, or actually, yeah, Pokemon dot Pokemon, because the inner property is called Pokemon. I want to check if that's true. Okay. Well, that shouldn't be reading the length anymore. Can I read properties? No, read properties null Pokemon. Oh, because in the initial, so really I want to do Pokemon, because again, it's going to initialize the variable as null. So I have to do Pokemon and Pokemon. So I'm checking whether the Pokemon variable is true and if the Pokemon.Pokemon variable is true. And again, there is no Pokemon, so I just need to refresh that again. And now it's working. Okay, and basically, I've reduced the amount of code I've written. So I got rid of all that useEffect, all the use state, all that. Because again, basically what this hook's going to do is just make the API call, store the result of the API call here, and then give me a function that allows me to call the API call, or redo the API call. That's essentially all this hook does. There are other ways of doing that, like there's React Request, which is a really good library. There's React Fetch, which is another really good library for doing this. But if you're using Merced React hooks, this is a custom hook that can really quickly just get the API call out of the way. You have the data. For simple calls, this is not a bad deal. Okay. And then you can sit there and see like, okay, if Pokemon are done. And there's probably better ways I can set this up. I can just be like, I can really just check if it's Pokemon, and then that should still work. Like if Pokemon's true, because I know it's going to be null before the API call is done, because that's how this works. It initializes the state as null, and then when it's not null, it's a thing. Okay, so that's how that works. So you can use that useFetch custom hook, and that'll kind of simplify the whole process. Okay, it doesn't do any kind of caching or anything like that, so it's really good again for simple API calls. When you start using the same data from an API call across multiple components, that's where like the React request library really shines, because it allows you to kind of use that data across your app in a kind of cool way. So something to keep in mind. Cool, but that's how you make API calls in React, and that's how you would use the useEffect hook earlier. So and then you also learned about this custom useFetch hook. So my name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Again, I will push this up to the branch. So pushy useEffect origin useEffect. Cool. And in the next video, we're going to talk about forms. So I'm going to just create a new branch for forms. Git checkout -b forms. So there we're good for the next video, and I'll see you guys there.